Father's Promise by Donnalynn Hess. Chapter 17. Night Raiders. November 1939. And when ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars, be ye not troubled, for such things must needs be. Mark 13:7a. The fire had gone out. It was pitch dark and icy cold when Oscar awakened Rudy from a deep sleep. Rudy had never been so tired. His arms and legs felt like lead as he unwillingly stumbled to his feet. And once standing, he wanted so much to lie back down that it was almost painful. But Oscar was impatient. "We've got to get moving," he said, and they set out immediately. After following the river for a few hours, they at last emerged from the forest into a field several miles west of the city. "Aren't you afraid someone might see us?" Rudy asked. "Not here," Oscar replied. "The Germans don't usually come this far out into the country without a good reason, especially at night." "What if that one German's still tracking us?" asked Rudy. "He is not," Oscar said. "How do you know?" He could come back while we were sleeping. He came back while we were sleeping," Oscar replied. "He won't be bothering us again." "Are you sure it was the same soldier?" asked Rudy. "I'm sure," said Oscar. "He didn't know I was there. He went straight for you." "I wonder how he found us." "Well, I'd say he probably was having a pretty hard time until he heard those rocks explode," said Oscar, smiling a bit as he remembered the episode. "Most likely he was quite a bit off track until you helped him out. I wonder why he didn't just come after me when he caught up with me earlier," asked Rudy. "Me too," replied Oscar, "but it doesn't matter much now." They continued in silence until Rudy saw a small village in the distance. "Is that where we're heading?" Rudy asked. "Yes," Oscar replied. Rudy waited for Oscar to tell him more. When he failed to continue, Rudy prodded him further. "Who are you going to see?" "There's a widow who lives there. She's a good woman and a true patriot," he said. "Her husband was a soldier, one of those killed defending Warsaw." "Did you know him well?" "Yes," replied Oscar. His tone made Rudy hesitant to ask more specific questions about the man, so he shifted the conversation back to the woman. "Does she have children?" he asked. "No," said Oscar. "Just a nephew who stays with her. He's a sour-faced boy, and I don't think he likes the idea of our resistance group meeting there." "Do you think he'd ever tell anyone about it?" "If he dared to, I'd hate to see him after he was done with him. I'd hate to see him after she was done with him," Oscar said. "She lets him talk, but he knows better than to try anything else. What should I do when we get there?" "Sit down and enjoy the warmth of the cottage fire and listen carefully." Rudy and Oscar were greeted at the door by the widow. She was a tall, striking woman. Though her black hair was streaked with gray, her face had a softness that made her seem youthful, and her voice a kindness that put Rudy at ease. "You're the last to arrive," she said, addressing Oscar. "Started a bit later than usual," he explained. "The boy needed some sleep. Looks as if he could have used more," she said, looking down at him. "You're Rudy?" Rudy nodded. I'm Anna, she said, and that's Joseph, she added, pointing to the sullen boy sitting in the corner. Catching Rudy's eye, Joseph gave him a look of scorn that immediately put Rudy on edge. From the looks of him, Rudy guessed that Joseph was 3, maybe 4 years old then 4 years older than he was. Anna Anna led them over to the table where they joined 8 men already seated. "These are my fellow patriots," said Oscar, as he and Rudy sat down. Rudy observed the men carefully. Some of them rough, unkempt men looked as if they were accustomed to their tattered clothing. Others, however, seemed more like gentlemen who had not yet realized that they were dressed in rags. Anna set a jug of sock, a type of fruit juice made from black currant, and some hot tea before them. She also brought a plate of sandwiches, meat sandwiches, and wafer-thin cookies. Rudy was suddenly wide awake, and it took all his self-control not to reach out and grab several cookies. He looked at the others. They were talking among themselves and hardly seemed to notice that anything was set before them. It then occurred to him that none of them had that lean, hungry expression he had seen on so many faces in Warsaw. "Hungry?" said Anna, as she set a plate and cup before him. "He shouldn't be, Oscar," said Oscar. "He had a big supper, and he probably ought not to be stuffing himself on his first day out of the city." "Still," said Anna, "I think he can find some room for cookies." "What do you say, Rudy?" asked Oscar, with a grin. "Have any room left?" "Plenty," said Rudy, growing braver. He added, "Where do we get all this food?" "We were starving in Warsaw." "The land has always been good to me," said Anna. "This year is no different. Though harvest time was harder, with the men off fighting." She paused, and a sadness passed over her face, and it vanished the next moment. "Such good fortune can't last forever," said Joseph. Everyone turned and looked first at Joseph, then at Oscar. Although Oscar made no reply, Rudy noticed that he began to pull on his mustache in irritation. "If you're worried, why don't you join us and try doing something about it?" said one of the soldiers. "I'm doing something," Joseph replied. "And what is that?" another soldier challenged. "I'm waiting," said Joseph. "Waiting?" "Yes, waiting until Hitler controls Poland and as he does Germany." In a moment, one soldier was on his feet, advancing toward the boy. "You little—" Oscar blocked the path. "Sit down," he snapped. "He's just a stupid boy. Let him talk." The soldier sat down, and after a moment Oscar did too. "I may be young, but I'm wiser than all of you put together. It's you and others like you, that keep Poland in chains," Joseph lashed out, heedless of the soldier's menacing look. Once we acknowledge Hitler, he will do for us what he has done for Germany. Then there will be enough food for everyone. We have only to do as he says." "You would sell your soul for a piece of bread," the soldiers shouted. You would let thieving Jews and gypsies rob the Polish people of what is rightfully theirs." "That's enough," warned Anna. But Joseph's comment had made Rudy so angry that he had not even heard her. "Jews aren't thieves," he said, glaring at Joseph. "How would you know? You a Jew lover?" Or maybe you're a Jew yourself, said Joseph, glaring back. Oscar placed a hand on Rudy's arm, and by force of will, Rudy managed to keep silent. He knows, said Oscar, raising from his chair and moving slowly to the corner, because he's a bright boy, one who is smart enough not to listen to fools who promise bread and hand out stones. Rudy was a little surprised at Oscar's staunch defense, but it pleased him. Oscar stood towering over Joseph, daring him to reply. Joseph knew he had no chance against such an opponent. Rising from his stool, he moved out of Oscar's way. Then he left the cottage, slamming the door behind him. Why do you let him stay, Anna? Said one of the soldiers. Because he's family. Because I hope he will one day come to his senses. I don't know, Anna, said Oscar. He's a bad one. Maybe you ought to make him go. He's old enough to fend for himself, and I don't see much hope for ever changing him. Hope for changing him. She stood a moment, thinking. I will decide when he is past hope, she finally said to Oscar. Then turning toward the rest of the group, she added, I will decide when it is time to make him go. You've wasted enough time arguing, Oscar said, returning to his seat. Let's get down to business. Get down to business. I've received word that there will be 5 German trucks passing about 5 miles from here at 3 in the morning. What are they carrying? A soldier asked. Ammunition, said Oscar, smiling. What's the plan? Said another. We take one and blow up the others. Why not take them all? Wouldn't work. We'll have a hard enough time jumping one. Who's going to take the one? I will, said Oscar. I want the rest of you to spread yourself out along the roadside, 2 by 2, about 50 yards apart. I'll be the last in line, waiting for the 5th truck to pass. That's the one I'll go for. When you see me stand up, I want you each to take aim and blow the gas tanks out of the others. If you're successful, the driver of the last truck will be so rattled I'll have no trouble jumping the truck and overtaking him. And if we're not, asked one man, we'll worry about that when the time comes, said Oscar. What about him? said a soldier, pointing at Rudy. He'll be coming with us, Oscar said. Then turning to Rudy, he added, You'll hang back, however. If we fail, take to your heels as fast as you can and head straight for the woods. There will be at least enough commotion to give you time to get out of sight. Can you make it on your own, boy? Someone asked. Hopefully he won't have to, Oscar said before Rudy could answer. At least not until I've had a few more weeks to teach him the ropes. But if you do have to go it on alone, he continued, addressing Rudy, remember you at least know how to cook a rabbit. You needn't starve. Speaking of eating, Anna said, I think you all had better finish up with these sandwiches. You'll need them. By midnight, they were on their way. Rudy stayed close to Oscar. Not that he did not trust the others, but he felt that they viewed him as a burden rather than a companion. However, we've got 40 minutes if they are traveling on schedule, Oscar announced when they had reached their destination. Let's get into position now. The men obeyed. I want you to move back several yards, said Oscar to Rudy as soon as the others were out of sight. You'll be able to see what's happening, and there ought to be plenty to see, but don't stay too close. If you had any ideas about being a hero, so soon you can just forget about them. You will stay put until I come after you." "What if you don't pull it off?" asked Rudy. "How will I know when to run for it?" "If you see 4 tracks go up in flames, stay put. If fewer than that, run for it. Now go on and get settled." While waiting, Rudy had some time to think. Up to that point, he had no chance to give thought to the consequences of the resistance group's actions. But as he lay in the field, he was reminded of the poster he had seen only weeks ago in the shop window. He was surprised at how many of the details he could remember. "If there is any destruction of German property, 6 people will be shot. For the death of any German soldier, 12 people will be shot. 5 trucks, 5 soldiers." He began trying to calculate how many lives would be lost, but his thoughts were uninterrupted when suddenly he saw the trucks come into view. They were moving quickly, almost as if they sensed the danger. 1, 2, 3, 4 passed. Rudy saw Oscar get up. The 5th truck passed, and Oscar jumped on the back of it just as the others began firing. It seemed at first as if no one could hit his mark. Then came a deafening explosion, then another, and another. Flames heaped up as the ammunition continued to detonate, sending debris flying in every direction. The 4th truck was moving so quickly that it crashed into the 3rd and exploded. It looked to Rudy as if the truck that carried Oscar would do the same. But there, in seconds of impact, it swerved off the road and into the field, weaving madly. It continued moving at a dangerous speed until it finally overturned. The others rushed toward the vehicle. Encircling the truck, they waited, rifles ready, while a man crawled out of the cab. Rudy could not see who he was, but when the soldiers lowered their guns, he knew that it was Oscar. Rudy watched as they unloaded the truck and divided the ammunition among them. Each man took as much as he could carry. Then they split up, each taking a different route toward the forest. "We did it," said Oscar, as he approached Rudy and motioned for him to get up and follow him. "That will keep them stirred up for a while, won't it?" he added, as they began their march toward the woods. It was obvious that he was waiting for some word of praise, but Rudy offered none. "Well, thanks for the congratulations," Oscar finally said. "I'm sorry," said Rudy. I was just thinking about how many people will be shot for what we did tonight." In the dim light of the forest, Oscar turned to him, a silhouette of irritation. "What are you talking about?" he said. Rudy realized that Oscar had no idea of the lists that were posted in the city. He explained. "Well, what are we supposed to do?" he said, when Rudy finished telling him. Are we just supposed to stand by and let them have their way?" Rudy said, "Have their way? Where'd I go?" Rudy said nothing. Oscar stopped and took him by the shoulder. "Listen, boy, do you think that they would stop shooting people if we stopped fighting back?" he said. "The Jews don't do anything to the Nazis, and the Nazis still shoot them down in the streets or round them up for the work camps." The words went home to Rudy, and he remembered his father standing in the truck as they took him away. "I'm not saying we should stop fighting," he said quietly. "Well, then, what are you saying?" Oscar demanded. Only that I wish there were some other way to win, said Rudy. Oscar stood looking down at Rudy for a moment more, then slowly turned. He kept his hand on Rudy's shoulder and led him back into the forest. The end.